It is good to see you this morning, and I'd like to echo what Dan said, a big appreciation to each person who's led our worship this morning. Everyone's just really allowed us to draw near together to the throne room of heaven, which is what we want to do. If you want to open in your Bibles to Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, we'll be there in just one moment. First, I want to remind you, though, that we are having the Saturday spring cleaning or building cleanup day or whatever name you want for it. This Saturday at 8 a.m. If you can't come at 8, come at 8:15. If you can't come at 8:15, come at 8:20. Come at 9, come at 10, come when you can. But we're going to be here and trying to clean up all sorts of areas in the building. But that also means that we will be looking to throw out a lot of things. So if you have something here and you don't want it to be thrown out, I recommend taking it home from your pew, or something. I'm kidding about that, but I'm serious as well. The dumpster will probably be filling up a little bit. So be aware of that. Now would be a good time, not now during the sermon, but soon will be a good time to look on your pew and say, maybe this could go home with me, okay? The other thing is, if you want to bring your vacuum or bring a mop or bring some other supply that you'd like to bring, you're certainly welcome to do that. And if you've hidden treasure here somewhere, don't get that. I'm going to try to find that. But just you want to be aware of that. Today we're resuming our study of extreme home makeover, of talking about our families and our relationships. And you probably heard the one about the lady who went in to talk with her counselor, and she said, "I think my husband is going to divorce me." And he said to her, "Well, does he have any grounds?" And she says, "Well, he's got about 20 acres. And he said, "No, does he have like a grudge?" And she says, "No, he's got a carport." And so he says, "No, I mean, it must be bad. Is he beating you up or something?" And she says, "No, I'm awake before him every morning." And he said, "You got to just tell me what's the problem in your relationship." And she said, "He says we can't communicate." Okay, yeah, I appreciate the laughter. All right, we're talking about marriage, we're talking about relationships, and we're talking about the foundation of our homes, and the foundation of our home being a deepening, we'll talk about that word in a minute, but a deepening Christ-centered marriage as the foundational relationship in our homes. Last time we talked about the blueprint, which is more fundamental than just one man, one woman for life. We're talking about how God made each individual, married or not married, to reflect His glory, to reflect His character, to reflect His nature into the world. Now, I want to encourage you this morning, if you're not married, maybe you've been divorced, maybe you are single, you've never been married, you want to get married, maybe you're looking to get remarried. I don't know what your situation is, but I want to encourage you, and when we're talking about marriage, that it doesn't mean you just have to say, well, I'll just go ahead and, tune out for this one and wait till there's one that's relevant to my life. I get it, right? We're talking about some specific things about marriage this morning, but I also want to make the point that, according to Paul, in Ephesians chapter 5, marriage does the same thing that we as individuals do. It displays the glory of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so when we're talking about marriage, Paul says, I want you to see that marriage is just another way that God shows the relationship that He wants to have with His people, the relationship of Christ and His church. And so when we're talking about marriage relationship, no matter what your situation is, if you're not married, I want you to remember that as we're talking about this in terms of our family relationships, it's also pointing us toward Christ. And so not only do you have an opportunity maybe to think about a future relationship, if that's where you're at in life, but also you have an opportunity to reflect upon the goodness of God in the glory of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So just keep that in mind as we go. You may have seen this make the national news about I don't know, 8-9 months ago. This is, if you can see the picture, these are two pictures of the bridge that spans over the Mississippi River coming out of Memphis, going from Memphis to, West Memphis in Arkansas. I have driven on this bridge countless times. I have no idea how many times I've driven across that bridge. It's an amazing thing the first time that you get to the Mississippi River and you see it and you just see the expansive nature of the Mississippi River. But anyway, going back from college, back when we used to live out in Oklahoma for a while as well, driven across that bridge many times, they discovered that this crack right here, and you can see it's cracked all the way down, had gone undetected for many years. They found actually that the routine inspections and all that, they had not detected this problem. What they did was they actually flew a drone out there, and that drone with a camera on it was able to see where this crack had formed, and they shut down this bridge, which I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of cars travel across that bridge every single day, probably every single hour. But they shut the whole bridge down for a period of a couple months, trying to repair this crack that they discovered with this drone footage. You know, I would have driven over that bridge with that crack many times. That crack was there for years and years, undetected, growing, getting worse every single day, but still there. On the surface, when you're driving across that bridge out of Memphis into Arkansas, everything looks fine, right? The bridge doesn't look like there's a big problem. The bridge is fully, it looks fully functional. Everybody's going across. Nobody's even aware that there's a problem. I want to encourage you this morning in your relationship. Some of you may have relationships where everything is sort of spilled over, and it's even apparent to your friends, and your friends are saying, oh, they're going through a bit of a rough patch right now, right? That may be where you're at. But there also may be an opportunity for you to look within, and I urge you to look within at your relationship and to consider, are there some cracks in my relationship that if I don't address are going to lead to significant challenges in the future? I want to encourage you to not just say, well, my relationship's fine. It's all right. Everything's okay. This bridge looked fine. It looked okay, but after a period of time, it was going to end with a whole bunch of cars going into the river, right? If they didn't address the problem that was there. In the same way, don't wait until your relationship breaks to begin thinking about your relationship and to begin thinking about what God says about our relationships with our spouses. I want to give you this morning 3 lessons, basic lessons from the Song of Solomon. We're going to start with the first point is going to be the lengthiest, and then we'll hit the other 2 somewhat quickly. But 3 things from the Song of Songs for us. By the way, there's discussion about who wrote the Song of Songs. The exact title is The Song of Songs of Solomon. Now, that word "of" might mean the Song of Songs that was given to Solomon. In other words, it was poetry written and presented to Solomon. Or it might mean the Song of Songs that Solomon himself wrote. I'm not going to get into all that. Just be aware that that's what the question about the authorship is. 3 lessons here from the Song of Songs about your relationship, about my relationship. The first thing, and by the way, we're going to take the big picture view. We're going to cover this whole book in this lesson, so we're not going to be able to go through every single line, but we are going to talk about several different verses. But this first point covers the whole book, spans the whole book. By the way, this is one of those books where people start reading it and say, how'd this get in the Bible, This is a book that we're probably not very comfortable with. I would dare say probably fewer people read the Song of Solomon than read Revelation. It's something that we're just not super, not only the language, the style, but also the content makes us uncomfortable. It's interesting to me that we live in a society, I shouldn't say that. Our society is one of the most, I don't know about but one of the most forthcoming and vocal societies about all things pertaining to gender, sexuality, marriage, all of those different things. But you know what? We as Christians, we sometimes are not even comfortable reading the type of language in the Bible about marriage. That's a call for us to consider what God would have us do and talk about and think about in our society today. Nevertheless, 3 lessons from the Song of Solomon. The first thing is, the Song of Songs presents marriage as a lifelong journey. I know that's not incredibly profound, but I want to show you how it plays out in the story so that this point can come to life a bit. And I'm going to put this on the slide in 2 ways. So this first slide, if you're a big note taker, you can jot it down very quickly. It's going to be the same thing on the next slide, just put maybe into more 21st century terminology. Basically, this book is organized in 2 chapter increments. 2 chapter sections, if you will. The story begins with courtship in Song of Solomon or Song of Songs 1 through 2. In this passage, what we're going to find is that the two meeting each other, learning about each other, sort of getting to know one another. We'll talk more about that in a second. Then there's a wedding in chapters 3 and 4. There's the wedding day in chapter 3. There's the wedding night in chapter 4. From there, the couple encounters some serious conflict. That's chapters 5 and 6. They go through a rough patch, if you will, in their relationship. Chapter 6 is when they're beginning to overcome that. And then finally, there's a period of renewal in chapters 7 and 8. There's courtship, there's the wedding, there's conflict, there's renewal. Let's put it into more 21st century terminology. The first thing that happens is the couple falls in love. There's the falling in love phase of the journey in their relationship. This is when, and I'm going to do some paraphrases this morning of Song of Songs to some of the analogies and metaphors we may not necessarily translate into our imagination the way that they were intended. But in this story, in chapter 1, you see these two learning about each other and really taking an interest in one another. And she says, "Tell me, where do you pasture your flocks?" And he says, "Well, baby, why don't you come and see?" You know, I mean, they're doing all this flirting, all of this talking, and they're just really infatuated with each other, and they've got all of this emotion and passion and energy. They're excited about this relationship. In fact, by chapter 2, Solomon is saying, and this is my paraphrase of verse 2, he said, "I've never found somebody like her before." And she's going to say in chapter 2, "I'm sick with love. I'm sick with love. I'm just so full of love for this person." You could probably think back in your marriage, your relationship, to that phase, if you will. I don't even necessarily like thinking about it as a phase, but we'll say more about that in a second. But there's this period of infatuation, of this great emotional energy toward one another. By the way, let me just say this now. When we first got married, everybody would always call that the honeymoon phase, right? Honeymoon phase. You'll be out of the honeymoon phase pretty soon. First year of your marriage is going to be the hardest year of your life. You know, if I had $1 for every time somebody told me that, there's no reason why you need to say, "Well, hey, we're in a new phase of life now. We don't need to worry about falling in love with each other anymore." We'll see that as the story progresses. They fall in love with one another, if you want to use that terminology. Chapter 3, everything is coming to a culmination. They're going to have a wedding ceremony. They are going to commit to love. Solomon is going to bring his, this great procession. There's going to be this great wedding day. And I love the way that Song of Songs chapter 3 describes this about Solomon. What it says is, in verse 11, "It is the day of the gladness of his heart." The day of the gladness of his heart. Solomon was eager in the story to make this commitment. He was eager to have this relationship. When you think about the journey of the song, we kind of stumble and fall on every level of this as it progresses. It strikes me that many people struggle to get into phase 2 of the journey. There's a falling in love phase, and then want to go from Song of Songs 1 and 2 to Song of Songs 4, which is the consummation of that relationship, without the commitment of chapter 3. Now, I'm not here to, I don't have a stick up here or anything. I'm not here to beat anybody over the head. What I am here to tell you, though, is that all of the research is in about marriage. And what it says is that if you are living together before you're married, you are not preparing yourself for marriage. You're preparing yourself for divorce. Because statistically speaking, if you bypass Song of Songs chapter 3 and you say, we'll fit that in later on in our relationship, statistically speaking, you have a much worse chance of your relationship lasting. Now, let me say this. It doesn't mean that there's no hope for you. It doesn't mean that the grace of God can't rescue that situation and transform it into a wonderful relationship. But it is a warning. It is a warning. They fall in love. They commit to love. In chapter 4 is that passage that has all of the pickup lines, guys. If you want a few things to add into your repertoire at your own peril. Your hair is like a flock of goats, your neck is like the Tower of David. Some of those things, easily translate into our language. But here you go. If you look at chapter 4, though, and this, I'm serious about this. If you look at chapter 4 and you look at the openness of their communication with each other, not just about well, let's put it this way, about body and soul, the openness of conversation. And you know what? Solomon in chapter 4, he praises every part of her body and soul. And he cherishes her in chapter 4. He's going to do the same thing in chapter 7. But he cherishes her, and he loves her, and he lets her know with his words how he's feeling. Boy, that's a challenge, isn't it, for us to have that kind of openness with one another. I'll get to that in a minute. They commit to love. Then, in chapters 5 and 6, they encounter a struggle. To summarize what happens in chapter 5, the wife is at home. Solomon's gone doing who knows what. I'm guessing he's not, fighting off a horde of enemies, He's working late or he's out late with the guys. I don't know what he's doing. But in chapter 5, she's up waiting for him. And she's waiting, and it's 8 o'clock. It's 9 o'clock. He said he'd be home at 7. It's 9 o'clock. It's 10 o'clock. It's 11 o'clock. And she's saying, he's not coming home, I guess. So she goes, she changes into her pajamas, brushes her teeth, all that stuff. She gets in the bed. She's starting to fall asleep. She's angry. She's not happy with him. He comes back, maybe 11 o'clock, 12, I don't know. But he comes back and he knocks on the door. She's locked the door, okay? She said, no, you're not coming in here. She locks the door. And he knocks on the door, and she hears him, but, it's kind of like, what? I didn't hear anything, And he knocks on the door again, and she said, I'm not getting up for this guy right now. I'm upset. And he kind of sticks his hand in the door and says, honey, can you please let me in? I don't know exactly what he said. Anyway, she says, okay, you know what? He's the king. He's got a very stressful day. I'm going to try to, okay. So she gets up, she gets dressed, she gets her shoes on, whatever. She goes over to the door, and she's going to let him in. And she goes to unlatch the door, and he's gone. He's not there. So she was upset with him, and so she's locked the door, and she's in bed, and she says, I'm not getting up. And he goes to the door, and it's locked. And you know what he says? He says, and he just walks away. And he just leaves. He just goes out somewhere. We don't even know where he went, okay? He just said, I'm not going to go in there, can't go in there. I'm just going to leave the house altogether. It's going to lead to a lot of challenges in their relationship. Boy, there's so many, well, we can have a whole lesson probably about the conflict that they have there. But you know what? Both of them could have looked at the other and said, you know what? You told me that you are going to be home at this time, and you weren't home at this time, and until you acknowledge that was not right, we can't move forward. And he could have said, yeah, but you know what? You don't know what I've been through today, and when I came home, the door was locked, and until you acknowledge that wasn't right, we can't move forward. And instead of struggling in love and looking past it and moving forward, What they could have done is they could have done what a lot of people end up doing, which is saying, well, I'm not going to see it your way. I'm not going to see it your way. I guess it's the end of the road for us. Life is a journey. Marriage is a roller coaster at times. And sometimes when we're going down the hill into a difficult patch, we decide to bail out. And that leads to a lot of brokenness. Nevertheless, this couple, they're struggling in love, but by chapter 6, they're coming together, they're learning to forgive. And by chapter 7, they're deepening in their love for one another. They're deepening in the intimacy that they have. It's actually gotten better now at the other side of things, because they didn't resign themselves, but instead chose the path of renewal. They forgave, they rekindled, they recommitted. They didn't abandon the process in this journey of the Song of Songs. Now, this means that our relationship with our spouse, it's a long journey. It's a journey where we can expect there's going to be some challenges, but there's always going to be, it's going to be worth it on the other side. We're going to talk more about number 4 here as our third point. But let me make this second point very quickly. Marriage is a lifelong journey. Marriage is also a daily journey. These same things can play out in your relationship basically on a daily basis. And here's what I mean by that. Every single day, you have a chance to live out the journey of marriage one day at a time. You can pursue each other every single day. That's chapter 1 and 2. You can pursue one another, and you can learn each other and what makes each person tick, and what the likes, dislikes, interests, all that. You can pursue one another every single day. Doesn't matter if you've been married for one day or you've been married for 10 years. We could, put Dwight and Mary on the spot. They've been married for 50 years, okay? Dwight should be giving a sermon, not me. But we can pursue each other every day. And we can commit to each other every day. And when we struggle, we can overcome obstacles together every day. Some of those obstacles, by the way, aren't intrapersonal. It's not that we're at odds with one another. It may be that you and your relationship, there's other factors that are causing you to be under a great deal of stress together. And you got to overcome those obstacles together. Every day, there's an opportunity to pursue, to commit, to overcome. And every day, there's an opportunity to renew rather than to resign. You know what? You can be married for a long time and be living in a state of resignation rather than a state of renewal. It is not always the length of time that you've been married that is the determining factor of the health of your relationship. It's a good indicator a lot of times. But you can live resigned and stay married with a ring on your finger and not have a marriage of renewal. A marriage of pursuit, of commitment, of overcoming, and of coming back together no matter what's happened, and communicating, forgiving, and moving forward. So, lastly, let me talk about that last phase in the Song of Songs, chapters 7 and 8 in the story. Deepening love, renewing love, is not easy, but it is worth it according to the Scriptures, according to what God says in His Word to Solomon. Deepening love, in their case, it required forgiveness in chapter 6. They had to be willing to say, you know what, we could argue about this forever. We both did things that were not right. Let's come together and say we're not going to hold each other accountable for those things anymore. We're going to move on together as one. It required forgiveness, but it also required rekindling. Chapter 7, it's another one of those pickup line chapters, okay? Chapter 7 is when Solomon looks at his bride years later, and he does the same thing. He uses some of the different metaphors. We're not going to have time to get into all those, but he does the same thing as he does in chapter 4. And at the end of chapter 7, she talks about how their relationship is comprised of both new things and old things. That their relationship is built on the foundation of the past, but it's also continuing to be vibrant in the present as they continue to kindle their passion and their love for one another. Then the last thing is there's a recommitment that takes place. I love what Song of Songs 8 verse 7 says. I'm going to put it on the slide, but I love what it says. It says, many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. If a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, he would be utterly despised. What's he saying? He's saying, you know what? We've been through so much together, but nothing could quench love. Nothing could drown it. And he says, you know what? If you gave me every dime that you had, and Solomon says, hey, I'm the king. If I was going to give every dollar that I had in my possession, I wouldn't do it for love. If that, then, is not the perfect segue to think about marriage and the gospel, I don't know what is. Because you know what? In our relationship with God, we had not conducted ourselves like these two in this story. Except for in chapter 5, right? In our lives, with all of our bad choices, all of our sins, all of the things that we had done wrong, and God still looked at us and said, you know what? I'll offer every dime I've got in order to keep that love, in order to restore. It's true that in our relationships, some relationships don't end up going the distance. Some relationships end up, much to our lamenting, don't end up making it the whole way. But when it comes to the love that God has for His people, many waters cannot quench that love. Neither can floods drown it. There's nothing that, Paul says in Romans chapter 8, there's nothing in all of creation that can separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. And it's because of what Jesus has done for us. It's because of the forgiveness and the grace that He provides for us that we're able to live in our relationships as images of God, as reflections of the character of God. That we have an opportunity every day to put on display the goodness, the patience, the forgiveness, the mercy of God in our homes. That the foundation of our home could be a healthy, deepening, Christ-centered relationship. And that's what the Song of Solomon is all about. If you're here today, maybe you need our prayers for something. Maybe you want to get right with God. Maybe you say, I've not been living the way that I should, and I need prayers from the church. Or I'm not even a Christian. I want to become a Christian. I want to have my sins washed away. I want to go under the waters and understand that in that moment I'm receiving love that is unquenchable. You want to be baptized into Christ? The invitation is yours to come as we stand and sing.